Easy to learn but difficult to master does not really hold true to Exalted Third Edition. No, this game is difficult to learn and even more difficult to master. But despite its complexity, Exalted is a great system designed for high-powered cinematic action. This is the Pattern Spider, a YouTube channel about all things Exalted, and this video covers a basic overview of Exalted 3rd Edition system, with everything from the basic mechanics to many of the subsystems that make use of these mechanics. This is a fairly long video that goes into many topics but can't cover all of them with too much depth. The purpose of this video is to act as an overview for those who are interested in the game and want to know what it's about, or for those who may be a little confused by the game's complexity. I will make future videos where I delve deeper into individual mechanics and subsystems for more in-depth discussions. A character capable of taking actions have a number of traits that define their capabilities. These traits are divided into attributes and abilities, where attributes represent the character's innate talents, while abilities represent their trained skills. In order to succeed on an action that has a chance of failure, the player combines an attribute score with an ability score and then rolls a number of 10-sided dice represented by the total score. Every die that comes up as 7 or higher is successful, and the number of successes needed is determined by the difficulty of the action. Because the game encourages cinematic actions, players can earn additional dice and successes to add to single actions if they take the liberty to describe the action in a cinematic way. These are called STUNTS, and they come in 3 different types. The lesser one, the 1-point stunt, is rewarded to the player every time they describe their action with some level of detail. Simply stating that "I attacked the bandit in front of me" would not be enough to earn a stunt. But, for example, saying that "I duck under the bandit's blade, shove my full weight into him and tries to slam him against the wall" would be worth 1 point. The fact that I add the additional detail to the stunt lets me add another 2 dice to my action. The 2-point stunt is rewarded to the player who describes their action in a way that stands above simply adding some level of detail. When a player describes a 2-point stunt, they should have the freedom to manipulate the scene somewhat in order to add additional detail. These types of stunts often use the scenery or add other sensory details to the narration. For example, "Seeing my Cephas' defenses already tight in place after his attack, I spin and take my toes through the wet sand of the shore, flicking my foot up in a feint that sends a spray of soggy sand clumps at his face." This 2-point stunt would let me add 2 dice as well as an automatic success to the action. Finally, the 3-point stunt, or stunts so awesome that everyone at the table is impressed. These are the kinds of stunts that often take advantage of not only the scenery and other sensory details, but often adds extremely cinematic or supernatural elements to the action. For the Exalted, these stunts are commonly used to narrate the use of charms and other powers. For example, "I bury my lance into the fresh powdered snow while glaring at my fleeing foe. Don't think you can get away so easily," I yell, kicking off against the ground and jump up the wooden wall. My cast mark bursts into full view as my body fills with the full strength of my essence. As I reach the top of the wall, my golden anima is shrouding my entire body, burning brighter and hotter than anything they have seen before. As I swing the lance around me to gain momentum for my attack, glimmers of golden light stream off in its wake, before I throw it directly at her in a furious blaze of light. If everyone at the table is sufficiently impressed to declare this a 3-point stunt, I would get 2 dice and 2 automatic successes to add to my action. Combat in Exalted is dynamic and cinematic. As shown in the earlier section about stunts, this game heavily encourages over-the-top action. It's important to have a combat system that embraces those kinds of actions, and Exalted 3rd Edition definitely does that. On its very surface, a fight is a battle of initiative, where characters fight to gain the upper hand against their opponent. Exalted simulates that by having 2 different types of attack actions. You have withering attacks that are aimed to damage your opponent's initiative score and increase your own. And you have decisive attacks that are aimed to damage your opponent's health. The reason why you want to first gain the upper hand in initiative before you attack your opponent's health is because your initiative is what is determining the damage output for your decisive attacks. Often, each fighter wants to bring the other's initiative into the negative. This is called an initiative crash and gives the winning fighter a burst of extra initiative, while the losing fighter has no initiative remaining to use against their opponent's health. As long as you are crashed, you cannot hope to win the fight until you manage to regain initiative by withering your opponent. The withering attacks and the fight for initiative usually make up the majority of the fight scenes. Once you decide to use your initiative for a decisive attack that successfully hits your opponent, that initiative goes lost and you reset to the base value, which is usually 3. If your attack didn't manage to kill your target, they now have the opportunity to wither you down instead, since your decisive move made you lose your upper hand. The best strategy against powerful opponents is to get so much initiative that you can almost guarantee that you will kill them with a single decisive attack. But powerful opponents are usually very adept at defending their initiative and preventing that from happening. There is a lot of strategy involved in how to best use withering in decisive attacks. Learning what works comes with experience, but there is no denying it that this system allows for some intense and interesting fight scenes. There are other elements to combat as well, such as gambits and rage bands, but I will talk more about those in future videos. The Exalted can stand against entire armies on their own, and the game reflects that through its battle group system. This is a system that lets you convert a single enemy type into a battle group of that type, and then run that battle group as a single unit in combat, but this unit encompasses a larger area and attacks all present targets at once. There are a few important traits that determine the power of a battle group. The first one being its size, which increases the group's attack rolls, damage rolls and soak, which negates some withering damage, depending on how large the group is. Size can vary from 1 to 5, adding to those traits accordingly. Once the group is attacked, sufficient damage reduces their size by 1 degree at a time until the group is vanquished. Making an attack against a battle group is often narrated as attacking several enemies within that group, with the exact number of foes defeated determined by the outcome of the damage roll. Another important trait is drill, which spans from poor to average to elite. This represents how well the battle group can act as a cohesive unit, and it increases their defense as well as their ability to follow commands. Good drill also helps the battle group become better at succeeding route checks, which prevents the group from panicking when they suffer heavy losses. Finally, the last of the traits is might, representing the supernatural power of a battle group. Not every battle group has might, but those that do gain bonuses to attack rolls, damage and defense. Might spans from 0 to 3, with most ordinary armies having 0, while armies of ghosts, demons or similar beings may have might 1 or 2, or even might 3 if they have other supernatural powers at their disposal as well, such as spells or artifacts. Might 3 should be rare though, as supernatural armies of such potency usually was a thing of the past. The main thing that makes battle groups stand apart from single characters is that they don't have initiative. Instead, attacking battle groups with withering attacks inflict actual damage upon their numbers. When the battle group attacks a single character, the battle group directly attacks the target's initiative, with all damage going into the negatives, transforming into physical damage against that target. This can make battle groups extremely dangerous against characters with low initiative, and it's very difficult to increase your initiative when fighting battle groups, since they don't have any of their own that you can take from. If you want to play a character who commands battle groups, you can do that as well. There is an entire strategic warfare subsystem that commanders can use to determine the outcome of a battle. There is also an entire system in place for naval warfare. Both strategic warfare and naval combat deserve videos of their own, because a lot can be said about it. But I won't go into more detail here. There is more to Exalted than combat. Social interaction is represented using a system that resolves actions when you attempt to manipulate, persuade, threaten or coerce. With the charms of the Exalted, you can use this system to intimidate the fearless, inspire gods and outbargain demons. The Exalted can be seductive or coercive, and the game presents a very important rule that is worth keeping in mind when using the social influence system. This is called the red rule, and it states that the player should always be allowed to retain agency over their own sexuality. If one character seduces another, and the player of the target is uncomfortable with being put in a sexual situation against their will, the red rule states that seduction fails automatically. Previous editions of Exalted faced some controversy over what some people refer to as rape powers. To avoid that in the 3rd edition, the Red Rule was created, and all powers that enhance seduction or sexual attraction only work that way on those who are okay with it. On others, an attempt to seduce a target could instead make them interested in friendly conversation rather than sex, which still lets the power do something favorable to the user, but the target doesn't meet the risk of feeling violated. In order to determine if a social influence action is successful, it needs to overcome a difficulty based on the target's mental and social fortitude. There are 2 defensive social traits, called Resolve and Guile, where Resolve defends against direct influence and Guile is used to hide one's thoughts and innermost feelings. Every character also has a number of intimacies that are separated into ties and principles. Ties represent the character's emotional connections, while principles define the codes that the character lives by. These intimacies are further divided into 3 tiers of intensity, going from minor to major to defining. I am in love with the intimacy system, so much so that I am using aspects of it in other role-playing games as well. The intimacy system not only defines the bonuses or the penalties a character benefits or suffers from in a social situation, but it also acts as a useful and comprehensive depiction of a character's background and personality, which can be used by the storyteller to plan the game. There will definitely be a video in the future where I talk about my defining love for intimacies. When I talked about stunts earlier, I forgot to mention one of the more important aspects of them. Narrating a stunt gives the player more freedom to manipulate the scene in a way that's normally up to the storyteller. A player who stunts takes control over their action and helps to drive the scene with more agency. There is another way to control the setting as well, but this is on a larger scale. The lore ability represents a character's knowledge about the setting. This ability lets the character introduce and challenge facts about the world. Once in a scene, a player with sufficient lore may state the fact about the world and roll their intelligence attribute with their lore ability. The storyteller decides a difficulty based on how likely it is for the fact to be true, and incorporates it as an established part of the setting if the player's role is successful. This presents a new take on playing the scholarly type of character, where you can use your character's skills to make the world accommodate your knowledge instead of the other way around. The storyteller can veto this if the introduced fact completely contradicts what makes sense for the setting, but the player is free to make up characters, towns and history as they wish. For example, a character with the ability to raise the dead runs into combat out in the woods. Cornered by her enemies, she introduces the fact that this part of the woods is located upon an ancient battlefield, and she rolls intelligence and lore against the storyteller's difficulty. If successful, the player has determined that there are corpses on the ground that can be used for her spells, and the storyteller accepts it as true. With this in mind, the character raises the corpses and uses them to turn the fight around. Similar to how a player can introduce facts to the game, they can challenge facts presented to them. If there is something about a fact that rings false to the player, such as the farmer saying that her crops are ruined by a vengeful spirit, the player can make a similar roll to how a fact is introduced, with the storyteller determining the difficulty. If successful, the player confirms that the fact is false, and with enough successes, the player can tell how the fact is false as well, such as the crops being poisoned by a rival rather than ruined by a spirit. Crafting is probably the most controversial subject of 3rd edition. It is criticized for being an expensive investment, and that the solar charms associated with it consist of so much bloat that you either have to go all in or ignore it completely. The system itself works as a minigame of sorts, where you're motivated to create lesser crafts in order to open up the ability to create larger projects. Every project you create gives you points that you can spend on other crafting projects. There are 4 degrees of projects you can craft. Basic projects are simple tasks that a craftsman can make with little effort, such as furniture, tools, or cooking a meal. These provide silver experience points that can be spent to finish major projects. Major projects are significant endeavors that require more time or materials, such as preparing a banquet, forging arms and armor, or sculpting a statue. These provide gold experience points that can be spent to finish superior projects. Superior projects are massive undertakings, such as the creation of artifacts, warships, or palaces. These provide white experience points that can be spent to finish legendary projects. These legendary projects are great wonders only achievable by the mightiest Exalted. This system motivates the craftsman to constantly be creating things in order to stack the points needed for the more rewarding projects. The system itself works well, but it adds additional elements to the game that the player needs to keep track of. It's a level of complexity that works well for those who want crafting to be their primary focus, but that can be a distraction for those who only want to meddle in it. I see a lot of potential in the crafting system, but that was ruined by the sheer bloat in the solar crafting charms. But it seems like the developers of the game has learned from the criticism and will make crafting more streamlined for future Exalt types. I should make a video at some point that goes more into depth about the crafting system. I want to finish this video by talking about something that is undoubtedly the most important part of Exalted, namely charms, evocations and spells, the powers used by the Exalted to make them stand apart from the rest. These are the powers that change how the Exalted use the rules mentioned previously in this video in order to allow them to make their over-the-top cinematic actions. Charms are the innate powers of the Exalted, with different types of Exalted having different types of charms. The core book only supports the Solar Exalted, whose charms are associated with their abilities, such as Athletics, Brawl or Stealth. The Solars exceed in the use of abilities, and these charms are why. For example, the Athletics charm Graceful Crane Stance makes the Solar incapable of losing balance, while the Brawl charm Heaven Thunder Hammer makes her punch so hard that her enemy hurls across the scenery. There are also Martial Arts charms. These are available to different types of Exalts and are associated with specific styles of combat. For example, Snake Style lets the martial artist fight with the flexibility of a serpent, while White Reaper Style lets her use a spear or a scythe to carve through the great numbers of foes at once. There are great created wonders called artifacts, and an Exalt can attune to these artifacts in order to draw forth a power stemmed from their bond. These are called evocations. They work similar to charms but are associated with the artifact rather than the Exalt himself. All artifacts are created from different types of magical materials that resonate with different types of Exalts. For example, artifacts made from jade are likely in the hands of the Dragon-blooded, who resonate with jade but not with artifacts from other materials. There are a number of magical materials, and the Solars are the only Exalts who resonate with all of them. Finally, a character can learn how to shape sorcery and use it to assert control over reality. In order to learn how to use sorcery, one must first initiate into it. The character acquires something called a shaping ritual, which is a specific feat or circumstance they can make use of to enhance their ability to cast spells. In addition, one of the sorcerer's spells is called a control spell. This means that the sorcerer is shaped by the spell itself and that it becomes part of her identity. For example, the spell Death of Obsidian Butterflies gives enhanced effects to a sorcerer who has it as a control spell. But when their emotions run hot, butterfly silhouettes rise from her shadow and her fingernails turn into sharp volcanic glass. A sorcerer is shaped by her spells, just like she's shaping the spell itself. There are 3 circles of sorcery: the Emerald Circle, the Sapphire Circle, and the Adamant Circle, also called the Solar Circle. While most can manage to initiate into the first Emerald Circle, only powerful Exalted can initiate into Sapphire. And Solars are the only ones who can learn the Adamant Circle. There is also supposed to be a dark mirror to sorcery called Necromancy, but the core book does not present rules for this, and so far no 3rd edition supplement has introduced such rules. A sorcerer can also permanently reshape the world itself using something called Sorcerer's Workings. This can best be described as a system where sorcery meets crafting and the character undertakes a massive project where they accomplish a feat that goes beyond the scope of ordinary crafting or sorcery. With this, a character can curse or bless a field, create a magical road that never tires those who walk on it. She may rewrite the laws of nature, and much, much more. Exalted is a game that has much going for it, and I have only scratched the surface with this video. The game system has rules that you can interact with in order to do pretty much anything you can think of. Finally, the supernatural powers, such as charms and spells, let your characters stand out in the world by helping you interact with the system in a dynamic and fun way. Because the game is so complex, it's not easy to just pick up and play. I hope that I haven't discouraged you from the game with this video, but instead inspired you to see the potential of this system once you really get into it. I will make videos that will provide useful tips on how to tackle this system in a way that's approachable for new players, so keep on the lookout for that. Finally, see the links below for where you can learn more about the game, and remember to like and subscribe if you like what I'm doing and want to see more. Until then, see you in creation.